Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, The Real F Word, Understanding the Source of False Positives from EDR Systems and How to Ease the Pain, sponsored by Vmware. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. Today's featured speakers are Jake Williams, SANS Senior Instructor, and Andrei Voitenko, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Vmware. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to turn the webcast over to our presenters.
Hey, thanks so much, Carol. I really appreciate it. And I got to tell you, this is not my first rodeo with Vmware. We've been, we've done a lot over the years, together, both, with SANS, outside of SANS. I'm a big fan of Vmware. And so this is my first rodeo with Andrei, though. Andrei is our senior product manager, basically for Vmware Analyzer over at Vmware. We're going to cover what Vmware Analyzer is, but first, obviously, we're going to set the stage for why is this an issue for security operations centers, right? It totally makes sense for me when we get into, we start talking about, for instance, malware analysts, digital forensic investigations like the DFIR investigations. But, why is this something that I want to be considering in my security operations center space as well? Before we get going, Andrei, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do at Vmware, give a quick introduction about your background here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jake. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrei, and I'm with Vmware. I am the senior product manager there. Basically, like Jake already said, I'm responsible for Analyzer, so I'm moving this product ahead. It should be considered that my major goal for today will be to push Analyzer forward. However, that's more of a kind of a conversation between us, obviously with some part of the story about our product as well. But what we mostly want to cover is why we have these problems with EDRs and how we can fix this.
Bingo. And speaking of the EDR problem, let's actually pick that up, right? So we get into typical customers. They have, a security operations center, right? And they've got a cert. And typically, what I thought about here, and Andrei, I'm dying to know if this has been the case here, because when I've worked with Vmware in the past, I've been pitching this towards, this product towards malware analysts who want to accelerate their malware reversing and their malware analysis, operations. I haven't ever considered really dropping this into a security operations center before, as a product. What are you seeing in that landscape? Am I kind of hitting this correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. That's exactly where we wanted to start, because the whole story came out a little bit unexpected. Like last year, we started seeing a little bit of unexpected usage. Let's say, like you've said, we got the company and the product, they are both very established. We have a very good recognition in senior analyst community. Like we get many customers who are seeing us somewhere on the conferences. They hear it from friends. They just come and say, hey, we know you are fantastic at malware analysis, and that's why we want you. So usually that's a company where they've got a very big security unit. It's CERT, or it's called somehow else. The typical user for us is the senior guy who is doing malware analysis, or the whole unit which is doing malware analysis. But what they usually did, they just it's like they usually just throw in files manually, as they want to see the behavior for some particular cases, because they are responding to some very sophisticated incident. But last year, the picture has started to change a little bit. We saw a little bit of, and it's constantly increasing. We saw attention from the companies which were either smaller then we would expect to have this big and well-defined security operations center and CERT and so on. Or some of the customers even started increasing their quota for Analyzer because they want to do something we didn't know what exactly. Of course, we are happy when we have new customers or we have existing customers which want to get more of the product, but the question was why? I mean, why do you want to do this? And we started digging in and speaking with those customers, and that led us basically to what we are going to speak about today.
And that's fantastic, right? So, you know, again, just to kind of wrap that back around here, what I'm hearing is that traditionally, you know, Vmware has marketed this product analyzer more to my deeper investigation, you know, teams, right? And that over the last year or so, you're seeing a lot of adoption by organizations that don't even have those teams, and they're buying them for the security. They're buying the product for the security operations center to basically do some of their own stunts rather than trying to elevate that to like a third party or something. Am I hearing that correct?
Absolutely, and that was kind of unexpected. Like you
Yeah,
get a company which is running some shops, and then they can't have so many sophisticated cases. We don't believe in it.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting point, right? Because, and I can see that too, as somebody who's done some work in the vendor space in the past, right? You don't want to sell somebody something that they're not going to use, because you're not going to keep that sale. You're not going to keep the customer down the road anyway. And I can see where you're like, how many cases are you actually working, kind of thing. I can totally see that being a question. Yeah, I've never been in your shoes as a product manager, obviously, but yeah. So kind of picking up off of that idea, right? You know, we talked a lot pre-show, obviously, you know, about EDR. I obviously love EDR, right? EDR is awesome. It gives me visibility into endpoints I never had before, and it generates a lot of alerts. And with those comes false positives, right? And I know we're going to talk more about false positives as we go. But you know, EDRs obviously jumpstart security operations centers, particularly the more junior analysts. They help jumpstart those in a way that, you know, the SOCs of yesteryear, right, where you would forward some event logs to a SIEM and pray that your analyst, you know, somehow read the tea leaves correctly, you know, with the alert. Now we're getting a higher volume of alerts, but are they better alerts? And I guess, Andre, I'm curious, you know, what are you seeing on the VMware side here, and how is this all playing out with your clients?
Well, what we are seeing here, I like the story with the SIEM, because what we are seeing is more or less the same. I mean, we are speaking with the customers, and they are saying us at the moment that it's more or less of the same story, because when SIEMs appeared, it was like, wow, now I've got tons of log. I can do something with it. And we got all these fun correlation rules and so on and so forth. Let's use it and we will catch hackers. And yeah, it didn't work this way. I mean, you have to tune constantly. You have to adjust constantly. We got, I don't know how many SIEM vendors out there, and the whole industry is well established for many years already. Still, finding yourself a good SIEM analyst is a problem today. And exactly the same happens with, well, with EDR at the moment, to the correction that the EDR itself is much younger at the moment. Like, it has just started a couple of years ago. With SIEMs more than 10 years already in place, EDR is much younger, and that's why the hunger from one side is bigger, but the problem to find the right guy to deal with this is bigger as well.
Yep. And I think you're right there. You know, one of the things that I observed many years ago, when you know, I was working, as I mentioned, you know, before pre-show, I did some work with HP Gary, and you know, we had an early EDR back in the early 2010s, right? You know, that you might, I don't even know if you would technically call it an EDR, but let's call it that. And you know, it lowered that barrier to entry to get an analyst into the room, and that was awesome, right? Because suddenly, you know, you could just roll in, and HP Gary, by the way, hugely defunct, long gone. But you know, you could get an analyst, a younger, less experienced analyst, up and operational quickly. And that was awesome. And we loved that until they hit a false positive. Because when you hit a false positive, when all you know is how to interact with the console, and that's what we find so many of our level 1 and level 2 SOC analysts, that's kind of where they're at. They know a tool, but they don't really understand functionally what the tool is telling them in so many cases. And so it was great to get a younger, more junior analyst on keyboard. But the second the tool didn't operate 100%, it caused, in many cases, caused more problems than it solved, right? And I'm sure you're seeing that as well. Actually, I shouldn't put words in your mouth. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well? When a false positive comes, there's a lot of confusion about how to deal with it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We hear here and there that, yeah, we got this new thing. It is nice. Our seniors love it. But when we're trying to put it in the hands of junior, that causes confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And what we hear even more is, well, we got customers who are not so well developed in terms of security, who don't have these bright seniors. Still, they want to implement EDRs because they hear it's very important for them.
Mm-hmm.
They hear that without EDR, you can't cope with all those new advanced, sophisticated, and so on threats. So they want to try it, but yeah, they don't have enough knowledge to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that actually pivots very well into kind of what we have here, as far as expectation versus, versus reality. And by the way, please don't think I'm knocking EDR solutions. I love EDR solutions as the tools that they are, right? And I know Andre is, in the same spot here, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah. And the expectation that we keep hearing is, oh, it's going to be low false positive. You're going to tune, you're going to get all this automation, because it's so much more intelligent, so much more data, we're not going to have false positives. As a matter of fact, I remember, and I can't thankfully remember the vendor's name, but I remember, 5, 6, 7 years ago, SANS doing a webcast where, I think I do remember the vendor's name, I'm not going to call them out, where they actually kind of made that point. They're like, forget your SIM, it's all EDR from here on out, because we have more data, there's no false positives. And I'm like, I'm sorry, no false positives or low? And I think the more we inspect, right, the more data points we look at, right, the more false positives we're truly seeing, right? And you've got that kind of noted here, Andre, where, very noisy, lots of false positives. And that, of course, then requires a lot of attention from analysts. And I'm curious if you want to, speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, Jake, absolutely. Thank you for that. I would flip it a little bit over, because what we are seeing as well is that with many companies, they just really consider EDR as a kind of a next generation EPP, which is a next generation of AV or something like that. Yeah. And with EPP, we got a kind of a standard that it's like, it's something which protects you. First of all, it's something which protects you from threats. Mm-hmm. It's something which doesn't bring any FPs at all, because they have eaten all their dog food for many years, and they don't produce false alarms, because, like every company who is doing EPP at the moment, they had their bad days when they were blocking svchost.exe or something like that. Yeah. Well, I've been working for one of those for a very long time, so yeah, I can admit that it happened. And the expectations again from those smaller companies are like, that's a kind of a new thing, which is more or less the same with the previous generation in terms of how easy it is to adopt it, but it will surely protect me from the new sophisticated threats, because everybody is speaking about the hackers today. And the reality is a little bit different. The reality is that, yeah, obviously, when you start speaking with them, explaining that, come on, no, your EDR is a separate product from your EPP. You don't need to throw your EPP away. And then they say, like, what? I'm having 2 agents? No way. I don't want it. And they start looking if their EDR vendor has EPP already, or their EPP vendor has already brought some EDR capabilities. Yeah. That's also the move we see. But still, they really have hard times understanding that the goal of the EDR is a little bit different, and it has to bring yourself more alerts.
Yep. I think that's actually a really critical point, right? Because I think it's very easy to come off, or for us in our conversation here, to come off as we're anti-EDR. And I want to make sure that we are abundantly clear that's not the case, right? This isn't an anti-EDR kind of space. We're not talking bad about EDR. There is a reality that because EDR is looking at more data points, right, it's going to find more things that cross that gray line into I understand why you thought it was bad, right? Suspicious, right? And I know you had to raise an alert because we didn't know, it was suspicious. And okay, but so we have, the more you look at, the more we're going to have, some of those false positives. I think about, false positive set, and we'll talk more about this when we look at Analyzer, a little bit later. But I remember a false positive that I've seen repeatedly, actually, where the EDR says, whoa, this binary isn't signed and has high entropy, right, which means it might be packed, right, and it's like it has a non-standard executable header, and I'm like, well, that doesn't mean it's bad. Yes, those are signs, right, but like that alone doesn't necessarily, but it's raised as suspicious. And if my EDR tooling, my rules along it's suspicious, right, is to block it, that may be now taking out some level of productivity, right, from employees. And so again, I think back to my SOC never used to deal with an alert that said, that literally said, this thing is suspicious. And you go ask the EDR and say, why did you flag it as suspicious? And it says high entropy and non-standard bits, not even explaining what, in the PE header. And you're like, yeah, but okay, I mean, forgetting is that a false positive or not, just demonstrably, this is data my SOC analysts never used to have. And so they never had to consider it. And that's what we want to really highlight here on the EDR side. Because it's examining more data, necessarily, we're going to see more stuff that falls into that gray area between definitely malicious and definitely benign. Andre, I want to kick it over to you here because I know you've got a ton of experience in the field with your customers dealing with exactly this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, Jake. It's like, when you've been speaking about that, I was like, wow, I'm back to my
yeah. Back to your superhero origin story.
I must confess, first of all, that I'm not a hater of the EDR either. I liked it. I mean, it's really vice versa. You never had something like the full visibility into what is going on the endpoint at the very beginning, and you didn't have it with EPP either. But now you have it, and it's like, it's a huge step ahead because of this new assume breach shift. I mean, it's not new already. It's a couple of years old, but still people have some of them at least have hard times with understanding that it's a kind of a reality. You can't fully protect yourself. You need to be able to respond to the fact that someone is already inside the network. And for doing this, you need to have all this information about what is going on there. So EDR is a kind of an absolutely brilliant tool. The question is how you use it and how prepared you are to use it properly. And obviously, in case we want to stay on a certain level of capabilities to detect bad, definitely EPP is a choice, and you can stay more or less safe from, I don't know, script kiddies or somebody else. However, when it's up to more sophisticated threats, you need to go for some extra tools. You need to go for analyzing some kind of extra data. You need to pick it up, you need to analyze it, and you need to come with the conclusions. And that's definitely would bring false positive. And that's what customers are speaking about. Like, no, we see a huge value from it. We were able to stop a couple of attacks, which we wouldn't be able to stop otherwise. But here is this small problem. Our SOC is overwhelmed. And that's another part of the story. I mean, it's a typical trade-off. Jake, what do you?
Well, I do want to kind of highlight here, as we kind of discuss, right? Discuss through this. Let's take a look kind of at the security space. Actually, before I do that, I'd be remiss if we jumped off this slide without noting that one of the common things we see here when junior analysts don't know what to do with an alert. And by the way, please don't take away from this that I'm taking a dump on junior analysts. I'm not. But we are presenting them with increasingly sophisticated data relative to their experience level as just part of the EDR ecosystem. And what we find beyond the frustration side is them suppressing alerts. Look, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. And I want to be super clear about that. But I have consistently heard from both internal and external counsel that you are better off from a liability standpoint not knowing about something at all than knowing about it and not actioning it, or basically ignoring it, or not taking the correct action on that based on that knowledge. And we see a lot of junior analysts do exactly that. They start suppressing alerts, and you're in a worse spot. Now, not only did you pay the analyst, right, to suppress the alert, you paid for the EDR to generate the alert, right? But now you have this residual liability of if the analyst doesn't get it right, and bear in mind here, right, that you have this huge range of suspicious binaries that are rightfully getting detected by the EDR. If the analyst is making the wrong judgment on these, you've actually increased liability. Again, not legal advice, but probably increased liability rather than reduced it, right? And that's exactly the opposite of where you want your security program to go. Andre, I don't know if you've got any more thoughts around that before we continue, but.
It didn't even came to my mind legally wise, but I've got the question from my friend that was yesterday. Yeah. She is working in the consultancy company, and it was like, well, we got a problem with a couple of nodes where our EPP is slowing down the thing. So how do we exclude all those folders from scanning? And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Why folders? No, because it's slowing down and everyone wants to exclude it. And I was like, you can come up with some fine tuning, like you can just exclude the processes, you can do some digging, get some data, and then you will still stay protected. Yes. But it was like, no. We just want it fast. That's it. And that's what we see really every day. Well, in every network, we got like, I think that's more or less two kinds of nodes which are always in question. These are the nodes for developers, because they are producing so many new binaries. And they are the sysadmin nodes, as those guys like to run PowerShell, write PowerShell, run PowerShell, do whatever they want with the PowerShell. And PowerShell, living off the land and all the stuff, that's the kind of a thing which is on top and on the headlines of everything. So all those machines, they come like in question with so many alerts from them, and they suppress it.
Yeah.
And then again, an admin machine where all the alerts are suppressed, and guess what your protection level is.
Yeah. And you brought up such a great point here. By the way, folks, this is not rehearsed. I hope that's obvious, right, as we kind of riff back and forth. But you brought up such a great point, developer machines. I get redonkulous numbers of false positives from developer machines. And so folks like, just exclude the whole folder where they're, the whole directory structure where they're building code. And I'm like, did we not live through SolarWinds? This is an ancient history, right? Solarigate is, we're talking, what, less than 2 years ago-ish? I guess just over 2 years ago. How do we have people who are like, no, it's developer machine. Don't worry, they're going to generate lots of binaries. I'm like, that attitude is how we ended up with Solarigate in the first place. And so I don't want to harp too much on that, but since you brought up exclusions and developer machines, it's a big pet peeve of mine. Definitely.
But it's a typical story. I mean, that's what happens every day.
Yeah.
It's not that just one customer just said it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but you're right. That's the thing. That's why I said, we didn't rehearse this, right? Andre from his customers, right, is seeing this. Me having ran, owned and ran managed security operations centers in the past, I can tell you it's something we absolutely have seen repeatedly. And the default, from the client side is, just whitelist the folder or allow list the folder, create an exclusion. And now I'm back to the whole problem of huge problem of, okay, but again, this thing pre-SolarWinds, I'm not saying that it made any more sense to do it, but you at least could play stupid and be like, what realistically is the risk? Post-SolarWinds, nobody has that luxury, right? You have to turn and be like, clearly threat actors are targeting our developer machines, period, right? Andre, as we kind of roll forward here, some of the ways we talk about with EDR solutions for this EDR/junior analysts deal with a false positive problem. By the way, it's not just junior analysts, senior analysts deal with false positives too. They just typically handle them a little bit more graciously and a little bit more quickly too, just to be straight. Of course, their cost per hour is higher, right? So there's obviously that. But we talked about MDR, hiring or training staff. Obviously you can try to tune your EDR or bring more context to alerts, but you've bolded here, and I love this, it's insight into sample behavior. Now, when I talk to people about the idea of using a malware analyst, right, to go and look at behavior, they tell me that's the EDR is supposed to do in the first place. what's different with using the malware sandbox?
Well, you know, I think I can give you an example. Let's just imagine. Again, it wasn't anyhow prepared. It just came to my mind while you were speaking. Let's just imagine you are coaching a kind of a soccer team, and your national team is playing on the World Cup, which is somewhere this year, and you are playing in the same group with the team from the region which you don't usually meet. Like, I don't know, I'm from Ukraine. Ukraine is playing with Australia. And the typical idea here, I mean, you like you're a head coach, you have to prepare to this. And a typical story would be to pick all the available information about the team you are playing with. Like you get who is their forwards, who is their defenseman, how do they score, what is their working foot, and so on and so forth, and so forth. And that's a kind of, you know, that's a kind of thing which is more or less equal to TI. You obviously will watch a couple of games of this team on the TV. But what is most important, probably, you will definitely send your assistant to watch the live game, because the TV will just show you one camera. They will show you when the team is playing with the ball, either offense or defense or whatsoever. You want to see different. What you want to see is the whole team behavior when they are playing all stages of the game. And that's exactly what running the file within the platform, I wouldn't call it a sandbox for a couple of reasons, within the platform would give you. That's a kind of an extra insight, which gives you a full understanding how this thing is behaving, and yeah, what basically you can expect from that. No, Jake. It wasn't that dirty.
I was just going to say, yeah. So I said a dirty word there, a sandbox, right?
It isn't.
To level set, right? Me calling VMware a sandbox, you know, is it's underplaying it so much. It's a lot like I'm trying to get a good analogy here, but it's all like looking at, you know, a Formula One car and being like, yeah, I could use that to carry my groceries home, right? Kind of thing. And you're like, well, you're missing the point, right? That's way missing all the engineering that went behind it there, because it is so much more than just a sandbox. And as a matter of fact, I think we've got an analyzer slide here that probably helps describe why it's a lot more than that. I'm just going to hand this over to you, man. Andre, talk us through this.
Thank you very much, Jake. Yeah, that's the part where you can close your ears, but you should probably not do this, because here is, I mean, well, Analyzer, it's definitely a platform which allows you to get an insight about what is going on and how the sample or a link behave when it is run on a on an endpoint. But what is more important is, I said at the very beginning of the webcast that we got a very high recognition from senior analysts. So I'm not going to speak about all the capabilities we've got within the product. I will speak about why they love us. And what they love in us is that they can throw in the file or a URL, and it will be analyzed with various technologies. Like we got 27 of them already and more to come. We have dynamic analysis, static analysis. We have dynamic web analysis. We will have machine learning pretty soon. Well, in case you are interested, just sign up for the, I don't know, for the presentation, and our customer success team will definitely help you. But well, actually, what is really important is that VMware gives you exact details of how the sample behaves. It can't be evaded. I mean, really can't be evaded. It's a very rare cases. I'm not selling you marketing here. I'm not telling you that it can't be evaded at all. But that's what we are loved for.
Yeah, but Andre, can I jump in here for a second? Because
sure,
if I had $1 for every time, you know, a vendor said can't be evaded, right? I'd be on. I'd own my own desert island, you know, tropical island. I'd be sipping on mojitos on a beach somewhere, right? I do think it's worth mentioning to the SANS audience. You know, there are traditionally have been a lot of players around the we'll help you automate malware analysis space, right? A lot of them have come and gone. You know, VMware is still here. I do want to mention though, I've never had a vendor come out and be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We want to do a sponsored webcast where we talk about how threat actors bypass and beat malware sandboxes and automated malware analysis tools until VMware. VMware came and they're like, hey, we want to do a whole presentation on, we want to catalog the ways that we see threat actors beating. Nobody else in the industry wants to talk about this at all. VMware is like, no, let's get the information out here, right? You only do that when you're comfortable that you aren't the one being beaten. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, Andre, back to you, my friend.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, my dollar goes to you. And secondly, yeah, we do have unique technology here, and we keep very much attention to the fact that we really show the full behavior, and that malware thinks it is at home, it should run, and it should show yourself in a full strength. So yeah, the next thing here, which is very important as well, is we produce very short but useful reports. Short means they are extensive. You can get all the necessary info there, but you don't need to scroll 400 pages something for being able to understand what's the insight and how the malware behaves. We do also produce no noise IOCs. That's not the problem, because the usual end up of the malware analysis, how do I do if I see it next time? How do I update my Yara rules or my snort signatures or my something? They want to have kind of IOCs for being able to timely detect it or protect from it. And that's where we are good as well. But the final thing is that, yeah, we are Analyzer. Analyzer is producing very reliable verdicts. Like if we say that's malicious, that's malicious. If Analyzer says that's something which is benign, it's usually benign. And that's a kind of a recognition again, which I'm not trying to sell here. I'm just telling the story about what seniors are saying about us and why they love us. Yeah. Over to you, Jake. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth mentioning here one of the reasons why why that happens. And I'm actually going to pivot off of this for a minute here. We're coming back to the slide because there's so much there, from augmenting your CTI team to integrating with SOAR. Obviously, the use case we've been talking about more here, which is trying to tear down that false positive problem, right, or deal with that false positive problem a little bit better. I think it's probably worth mentioning here why the behavior insights from Vmware Analyzer matter so much more, right? As Andre mentioned coming into this, even EDR is a kind of the next generation, endpoint protection, which is, a step above the old AV or next gen AV or whatever we're calling that. But from a behavioral standpoint, right? When EDR or whatever gives you a behavioral detection, it's doing one of a couple of things. Either it has hooked an API call and it's like, whoa, and hooked meaning intercepted, right? And it says, whoa, you just tried to do something that is obviously malicious, cutting you off right now, right? And doesn't allow that API call to complete, right? And so that's one way. Now, the problem there, of course, is you don't get to see what would have happened next, right? So you're cutting it off. The other thing that we see is emulation. And on the emulation side, basically what's happening is, and obviously there's some runtime overhead issues here on your endpoint. The EDR, right, is trying to run a few instructions ahead, right, in an emulator, every instruction that this binary is performing. Typically that's for, just done through startup for the first 10, 20, 30,000 instructions. But that emulation, there's been a lot of research into beating emulation. I'm not going to deep dive into any of that. But again, most people wouldn't consider EDR analysis light. And I know we started by talking about how much more intrusive it is, but by comparison to running in a fully instrumented system that's designed from the ground up to do nothing but instrument malware, obviously you're catching stuff. And the bigger piece being you're running to completion, right? Or running at least to completion of the analysis, I guess is a better way to say it, versus the running until it's no longer safe to allow this thing to continue running. And we have to cut the analysis off here. And that's that latter part is what you're getting with the EDR. Andre?
Absolutely, Jake. While you were speaking, also one thing which came to my mind was that it's more or less the same with when you are doing a kind of a penetration test for the real network, because you have to stop at some point. You can't play that you are bringing in real damage. Otherwise, you can cause who knows what. And that's exactly what's going on with EDR. You can't let it through. You have to make a stop. And when the malware is running the VMware, let's give it a go. We lose nothing. And that's a very important part of the show.
You know, when people have talked to me in the past, I can't think of how many SANS classes I've had somebody come up after class or at a conference somewhere and talk about false positives versus true positives. And they'll rail on their vendors, right? Where they're like, this is ridiculous. I don't know why we're getting so many false positives. And they're like, but they're not blocks. So many of them are just alerts. And I'm like, dude, just stop and think about it for a second. I want you to think from an executive standpoint, a stakeholder standpoint. They go spend, let's just conservatively say, $100,000 on EDR for the enterprise. And again, that's super conservative, but they just a straw man, right? They go spend $100,000 on EDR for the enterprise. The EDR blocks a critical business function, right? One time. Blocks a critical business function that costs the organization $250,000, right? That's scenario one. That's the overzealous EDR. Scenario two is the EDR is like, I'm not 100% sure it's malicious, so it's just suspicious. You analysts deal with the alert. If your analysts yell all day long about false positives and how, we're getting, it keeps alarming on stuff that isn't really bad, and they're like, but is it catching bad stuff? I'm like, yeah, it caught some bad stuff and didn't cause an outage. Which one of those two do you prefer? It's obvious. And every EDR vendor, every endpoint protection vendor knows this. They know that false positives absolutely kill customer retention. I can't say which vendor, but I was actually in the headquarters of an AV vendor, antivirus vendor, endpoint protection vendor, I guess is a better way to say it. And they actually had a printed banner up on the wall, and in the developer workspaces. It's obviously pre-COVID days, right? But it said 0 false positives, right? And now, granted, they're talking from a block standpoint. EDR, when we talk about false positives, most often in default configurations, is just raising these false positives as alarms. But Andre, that was such a great point, man, about you're letting it run longer. It's not like a point in time assessment, like a pen test versus a threat actor. I love that analogy. I'm stealing that, right? What about this time fast forwarding? Do you want to speak a little bit about this for folks that maybe haven't experienced this before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Basically, it's a kind of a two-edged problem, because from one side, when you are running the potential malware I'm trying to pick up the correct word, in some isolated environment, let's call it like that, you are at risk that the C2 or something like that is not available. Well, it's simply not available at the moment. Mm-hmm. But you can get it the other way. Like you got a malware which takes its footprint on a system and then stays dormant for, I don't know, 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. The traditional storage or retention period for EDR is from 2 weeks, maybe to a month. Mm-hmm. If you are rich enough, you can pay extra and get 2 months, 3 months. But what if it stays dormant for, I don't know, for half a year? That's a kind of a behavior which you will never get. I mean, and it moves very slowly within a couple of months. I mean, it makes some next move, wait for a couple of months, makes a move, kind of slow, but this way. That definitely will give some advantage to the malware. And that is definitely which you can try to reveal when you are dealing with running it in a kind of an isolated environment, because you can play with the time if you do it right.
Well, that's it. There's 2 great points here, right? Well, actually 3. One, what Andre is talking about is not theoretical in any way, shape, or form. We started, and I feel dirty even bringing up SolarWinds again, but we talked about SolarWinds, and the SolarGate or Sunburst malware does exactly what Andre is talking about, right? It doesn't do its full execution initially. Right. And so it waits effectively to, I believe it was 17 days or an average of 17 days, which conveniently that wasn't some random throw a dart at it. That 17 days is greater than 2 weeks, but not by a lot.
Exactly.
Because to Andre's point, the vast majority of EDRs have 2 weeks of retention, vast majority, and in default configs, right? Another point that I want to make here is you talked about the speeding up time, almost like from a calendar standpoint, but there's also one of the old, I mentioned, the emulation that so many of our next-gen antivirus and EDR platforms do. And I mentioned they only do it because of performance overhead, only do it for a limited number of instructions. And so, what a lot of threat actors have figured out is that if, let's say the average emulation runs for 20,000 instructions, if they do just a bunch of garbage there for the first N instructions, right, they can beat the emulation process, right? Secondarily, some folks are like, yeah, I'm way too lazy for that. I'll just go to sleep, right? Because it's not just N instructions, it's also N instructions or a couple of seconds, right? And so they'll go to sleep or 10 minutes or, because now, and I'm going to say the dirty word again, Andre, sandbox, right? When you go run in a sandbox, the typical execution time is 3 minutes or 5 minutes. So they'll sleep for a couple hours. As Andre mentioned, you can speed the clock up in your analysis environment, but you have to be really careful about how you do it because threat actors are wise to that. And if your platform isn't appropriately instrumented, then you're tipping your hand to the threat actor. Very much like, we talk about with the EDR side, the malware can see the EDR. It can't see the VMware Analyzer because the whole virtual machine, basically, correct me if I'm wrong here, Andre, but effectively you're controlling a hypervisor at that point, right? Your platform is effectively, yeah, you're muted, but yeah, effectively a hypervisor.
Absolutely,
right?
sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah. I saw you nod. I was like, yeah, he's on there. So effectively you're dealing with or the threat actor, right? Trying to programmatically in their malware, remember, which has a goal besides anti-detection, is trying to then figure out like, okay, I'm not on a physical machine, right? I'm in, or technically, I guess it's difficult for them even to figure out they're in a virtual machine, but in this case, because you run a hypervisor, it's not obvious where they're at, right? Am I saying all this correctly?
Absolutely. And yeah, I just want to add that, basically we are already in the middle of the 21st century, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And yeah, the virtual environments are more or less a typical thing. So it should run on the virtual environment, but they still want to check a lot of things. They still want to check what is the size of the hard drive, what is the memory, how does it react to system calls, like you've said, and so on. Lots of things they want to check.
Yep. No, and that's it, right? And so for you to go fast forward time, though, it's not as easy as just saying, okay, let me reset the clock to 5 minutes from now, right? Well, that doesn't really impact a sleep call, right? There's lots of intricacies here. We seriously could do an entire webcast on nothing but the intricacies of resetting time to trick malware, right? It's that kind of detailed. The reality is these guys have just figured it all out. That's what they do and are constantly on the lookout for new malware that is trying to do something else sneaky and again, coding their hypervisor platform around that. So I want to go ahead and forward up a slide here and start talking about a couple of use cases. Andre, I know this is one from your customer space. Do you want to walk us through this?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually what we have found when we've been studying this all. Basically, the answer is pretty simple. We found, surprisingly, that customers are using us for automation. Like there are a couple of possible scenarios here, but usually it's more or less like this. You got senior guys who are already dealing with the product and who know that the product is good, they trust it. That's a very important story, by the way, the fact that the product is trusted by seniors, because usually it's like you've said, we got a new vendor A on the market, which is saying like, hey, I've solved all your toughest challenges, just buy XYZ, and you will have 0 false positive, eat healthy food, live by the ocean, and all this stuff. And it never worked this way, and it especially doesn't work this way when you speak to senior analysts, because they saw a lot. That's why they're seniors. And yeah, the product is trusted by seniors, and they start seeing it like, okay, we are benefiting from it, but still we want to submit we need to submit files there manually. Why should we? I mean, why should we spend our precious time for that? Why should we switch consoles and so on and so forth? Let's put this on some other's shoulders. And this some other shoulders can be a junior analyst. But junior analyst, first of all, he or she is busy because of the alert triaging. And secondly, they are under stress. And thirdly, well, again, we are in the middle of the 21st century. All the products are API based. Why not to automate this? Why not to get extra context about what file or link in question is doing fully automatically? Why not to get this? And that's basically what we started seeing. And yeah, I can pass it over to you, Jake, so you give your insight, and then I can continue with that.
No, it's funny you mentioned this, right? I see time and time again, consulting with security operations centers, we get a hit in EDR, and I can ask this question, and all the attendees, if we all had mics on, if I say, now, what's the first thing, you got this hit, right? You've got a hash now, right, of this file. What's the first thing you check, right? And they're like, if they don't already have it enriched through SOAR, they're just going to yell at virus total, right? Hasn't been seen before. So many of the EDRs, right? Like you click on the hash and it like does a little mouse over thing, and it's like query and virus total, right? So you don't have to copy and paste. They know you're already doing this. Well, then I step back and I'm like, guys, gals, why are you doing that, right? Why are you going to virus total instead of staying in the EDR console? And well, because I get more data about the binary. Right. And I'm like, exactly. Right. You want to know what, even at a very limited standpoint, what did it do, or at least what was it seen doing, et cetera. And that's why they're going. This, right, what we're talking about here with Analyzer is that on steroids, right? You're getting 100% of the execution trace at a level. And not only do you get a good consolidated report, but if you then have to pass that off for deeper malware analysis or malware reverse engineering, those runtime, those execution traces, can take something that would have been an 8-hour job for me or a 4-hour job and turn it to 30 minutes, right? And so that's a huge force multiplication effect. Fewer of those are coming to my malware analysts in the first place, but then they're addressing them so much more quickly as well. So I'll pitch back to you. I hope I answered the question, but I was just thinking about like what do I see people do every time? It's go to virus total, and it's for honestly like 2% of the information you're getting from this.
Absolutely. It's like I said, you want to see how Team Australia plays, you go see how Team Australia plays.
Right.
You don't ask your friends about that. You have to see it yourself. Yeah. So what we actually saw was, again, that what they actually do, they are integrated it well, either with SOAR, as that's a very typical consolidation point for bigger companies, or directly with EDR. And what they want to see is like, you got an alert at 11, and say 11:01 or 11:02, you already have all the context of the file execution, so that even junior analysts can very quickly decide whether it is a good or bad. Because say you got you got an alert from an EDR, which is coming and saying, this is bad. This is bad, you need to do something with it. Or, this is perhaps bad. That's even better. I'm not sure this is bad. This is bad because high entropy or something like that. And then you get a report from Analyzer, which is saying as well, that's a kind of a suspicious thing. But it's suspicious not because of the high entropy. It's suspicious because it tries to detect whether it runs within the virtual environment.
Yeah.
Suspicious and suspicious. You got two suspicious. Now you have much higher degree that you want to push it to the tier 2 for further analysis, because that's out of your competence, perhaps at the moment, and you will not get beaten. You will not be punished for that.
Yep. And we've got a great question here that I want to pivot to. I'm not going to read the gentleman's name because I don't want to like out anybody on this recorded webcast. But he talks about saying, hey, he's a SOC analyst. He's responsible for tuning the EDR, and he's asking, do we anticipate EDR search queries to become significantly more powerful as tools mature? I got to say, yeah, I think we're going to collect more data with our EDR every year as time goes on. More data we collect, the more things are going to fall into that gray area. And I think this pivots very well into this use case here where, we talk about, yeah, I do think that search queries, as you add more data, the search queries will necessarily become more involved. They will return more results. More of those results will stray into suspicious. And as a result, I need a way in order to keep, as I get more data, if I want to keep the same amount of headcount, I have to automate somewhere, right? And meaning I need to be able to enrich that data in a fairly automatic process somehow. And I think this speaks really, really well to that. If I've got, this blind spot detection, if I was kind of on the fence about something, running it through Analyzer and having that additional data allows me to confidently say either I need to escalate it or it's a false positive, and I can be comfortable marketing as a false positive. I hope that answers the question, but I do think queries will get more. Hey, Andre, where are you at? You've got background on this as well, and thoughts around this.
Well, absolutely. Like you you can stay with the with the same headcount, but just increase the number of working hours from 8 to 16. But it doesn't work for long as well. So yes, the more data you have, the more you have to use it in some automated fashion. And here it's even more important to somehow automate without bringing in more FPs, because the more you automate more data, the more you have to care about the results and everything.
Yeah. And I'd like to, we got about 10 minutes left here. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the analysis reports. I know we've got a couple of samples here. Do you want to kind of walk through a little bit of what we're seeing and why it's so important, for our analysts?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's my part of the story probably. But yeah, I want to say at the very beginning that this is not what we expect to. It's not what we expect junior analysts to go deep into, because for junior analysts, we have this top left corner, which says malicious, or vice versa, benign, clean, whatsoever. So that's basically what we think will help him or her to correctly triage the alert and to just make right decision under stress he is working with and make it fast. That's it's the first point. The second point is that if we got some kind of a little bit more experienced guy, we have those VTIs, which you can see, I don't know how to point it with my finger, but where the score and the category and the operation. Yeah. These are VTIs, and they are so-called high-level insights into the sample behavior. Like you see here, you don't need to go into very much details. You don't need to be a guru for being able to understand that the file is doing something bad and to know exactly what we think is bad. Because, well, like I said before, you see that your Excel file is doing some kind of injection, and EDR also mark it as doing some suspicious actions. That's the really right point to say that perhaps something is not right with this file. That's a very typical thing. In addition to that, we do have lots of very powerful tools for the senior analyst. When the case is escalated to him, like he can get the IOCs, he can get the memory dumps, he can get all the logs of files. He gets all the traffic, as you see the analysis pick up here as well, and which is even more amazing. We provide this traffic even if it's encrypted without man in the middle, which is not liked by nobody. We really provide lots of the information to the senior analyst as well, which is more important. He doesn't need to switch back to VMware console, throw in file there manually as when the alert arrives, and it is already triaged by the junior guy. He just need to click one link, don't need to wait for a report to finish and so on. We are saving time. We are saving time for juniors, but we are saving time for seniors as well.
Yeah, and again, traditionally, at least it's been my understanding, and certainly my use cases that I've worked with clients on VMware with, traditionally it has been the senior analysts that have really used this. It was there to take that very expensive reverse engineering resource and one, lower the barrier to entry for getting usable reverse engineering results, right, with a potentially less skilled malware reverser, but also for the people that are really, really good at it, still to save them time and speed them up. So you take that very expensive resource, and something, again, that was going to take 8 hours before now takes an hour, right, kind of thing. And so that was the original intent. But to your point, I'm with you, man. the junior analysis side, I think is super, super useful. I'll even mention too that, we've seen this with some SOC analysts where after you give them access to additional data, from enriching what the EDR is showing you, they start to make judgments about what's likely a false positive in EDR anyway, based on what the EDR is saying versus what they're seeing externally. So I love being able to go validate this. In particular, I really like being able to see, again, we see two different, injections or two different types of injection being performed. There's some anti-analysis here, right? You note correctly, right? Again, it's only a 2 of 5. That's not necessarily bad, but it is suspicious. You get enough of that stuff together, right? And so again, my analyst here has a lot more data to pivot off of. I know you talked earlier about integrations, but do you want to talk a little bit more about the integrations here to wrap us up in our last 5 minutes?
Yeah, sure. Well, with all these use cases coming up, we definitely had to do our homework as well, and to come up with the integrations, because obviously customer want to be able to switch it on with just a couple of clicks. And work is it smoothly, transparently, and all the rest of the marketing stuff which you usually hear on the presentations. That's basically what we did. We have the integration with more or less all popular source system. That's the kind of an entry point for us in this use case. However, some of the companies either do not, they either do not employ SOAR at the moment, or they just want to do it for some reason with the EDR directly. And for this, we have integrations with the most popular vendors from the EDR marketplace as well. Microsoft is not mentioned here. It's the work in progress. Other than that, I guess that more or less everyone who is important is listed. So yeah, whatever you want to do it, you just contact us. I'm not selling. I'm easing your pain.
Yeah, but no, I think this is actually before I move here, I think this is actually a really, really critical point. You brought up earlier, Andre, how it's the 21st century here, right? And everything now is API driven. And because you built Vmware Analyzer originally from the ground up as an API driven tool, the integrations are no problem, right? Taking these integrations, integrating with any product that itself can do API driven integrations is, again, it's plug and play. We do have one question here, and I think this would be a really good, I've got a couple of other questions, but I have one really good one here that I think we can round out with. The question is, why exactly do I, want VMware here and not some other, and I'm going to say the bad word again, why do I want the VMware platform and not some other sandbox?
Well, I guess first of all, because we're not a sandbox. We are threat detection analysis platform, but fair. Secondly, I mean, throwing away and giving you $1 again, I want to say that there are a couple of requirements which should be put in front of the product, which is doing the validation job. I mean, it should be reliable, it should be short, it should give very precise in terms of not this long verdict, and it should be trusted by seniors. Yes. That's what we got. I mean, well, switching to the beginning of the story again, the typical story of the security product is from marketing to the seniors. We have it vice versa. We are moving like Benjamin Button. Like we already have the trust of the seniors. We're just expanding.
Yeah. Yep. I guess what I would say here, if you'll permit me, is that if I'm going to do the types of integrations that we're talking about here, I have to be able to rely on the output from the tool. I know as somebody who does actually perform malware reverse engineering, I know that we see a lot of threat actors being really stealthy, bypassing a lot of the automated analysis. And I've just never seen that with VMware. Like I mentioned earlier, Vmware is the only vendor of any automated malware analysis that I've ever seen have the courage, the whatever you want to call it, the intestinal fortitude to get up and talk about how threat actors intentionally try to bypass their product. And the reason you can do that is if you're positive that stuff isn't getting past it. I guess I would say for the question of the why this and not something else, for me, right, I'm thinking about the ability to basically be confident in my results, right? I think is the best way to say it, because at that point, then I don't have to worry about, I don't have to worry about, okay, well, I handed it off and now I have bad data on top of bad data and I'm making a bad decision. One of the other questions that we've got here, and then we have to close out, is a question about transferring machine readable IOCs, I presume in a format like sticks or something, from an NDR tool, EDR, XDR, et cetera, back and forth to and from VMware Analyzer.
Yeah, we do have IOCs. We have integrations with the most of the, like you see, with the most of the popular TIP products. Like the most common is probably Mist, but there is also Anomaly and Threat Connect. So yeah, once you want it, you just throw it in there, and that's it.
Well, there we go. Game on.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh no, good.
I just wanted to say that we do our homework. Again, we have customers who request us to work on automating SOC processes which are related to malware. We do the job.
Yeah. Look, man, this has been fantastic. And honestly, we could have carried this discussion out another, hours, right? If we wanted to deep dive into this stuff. Andre, thank you so much for being here today, discussing this use case and bringing this content to the SANS community. I really appreciate it. Thanks to you and Vmware both.
Thank you very much, Jake. Thank you for hosting this.
Sure enough. Carol, I want to hand it back to you to close off the WEBCAST.
All right, thank you so much, Jake and Andre, for your great presentation, and to VMware for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.